Hi everyone, we're starting in a couple of seconds time, so get a cup of coffee if you can. Alright, for this event, it's an event by a group of Singapore agencies who are trying to help a lot of the UK companies find out more about Singapore and Southeast Asia. My name is Zilin, and if you need to reach out to anyone who can help you with Singapore and Southeast Asia, just look out for the SG tag over here. Plenty of us around, all willing to answer any questions that you have. We're doing this exhibition because we wanted to make a statement about tech for good. You can see over there are 12 panels here about the art exhibition. It's an NFT art exhibition with artists from UK and Singapore. All of the proceeds, whatever is bought over there, will be given to charities that are from UK and Singapore. So we hope that you can take a look and support them. I think half of the collections have already been sold yesterday, and we hope to raise even more funds for the charities that we're supporting today. And we can't do this without the community out here in Europe and UK. And I wanted to also thank everyone for coming today and apologize for the smaller room. We'll look for something a little bit bigger next year, all right? A little bit more space. Before I start, I wanted to introduce one of our key partners for the Singapore government, which is SG Innovate. If you want anything to do with deep tech in Singapore, anything to do with deep tech in terms of like investments, who is helping the deep tech ecosystem from AI, machine learning, additive manufacturing, I 4.0, these are the people you have to speak to. And we're very honored today to have the CEO of SG Innovate, who is Dr. Lin Ji, who is over here today. He has extensive experience in different, from investments, biomedical sciences. He's also somebody who is trained in medicine as well. So for someone to lead an organization in deep tech who understands all this, we're very honored to have him here. So without further ado, I'm going to invite everybody to give a round of applause for Dr. Liu today. All right. So over to you for the panel, please.
All right. Thanks, Zilin. You saved me a lot of work with that introduction. But I, like Matt earlier in the previous session, can I just have a show of hands who's deep into blockchain and decentralization? Okay, so it's about a third thereabouts. And who's blockchain and decentralization curious? Okay, the majority. So I'm one of you. I come from a medical background. I can't say this is, I'm an expert in this, but I look forward to learning a lot from this panel before me. But blockchain and decentralization, these are constructs that hailed on the one hand as agents of positive change and crucified on the other as a threat to global economic stability. You know, there's a lot to talk about. I think I'm not alone in quietly rejoicing in the prospect that a blockchain-led sort of decentralization movement will bring power back to the people, whether by disintermediating third parties so that funds and goods and services can be more accessible, or by facilitating travel during the pandemic, or by making healthcare and drugs safer. But equally, I think it's fair to say there's almost a visceral discomfort for a lot of us who don't understand it. We have the blocks, we have the nodes, we have the decentralized autonomous organizations, and somehow, just like the invisible hand of self-interest, it's all supposed to come together magically and deliver to us the promised land. Even the discussion around risks, trust, and the regulatory countermeasures is a discussion that's frankly quite disorienting. So today we're going to try to make some meaning out of this madness, and arrayed before you are 4 exponents of the art and science of blockchain technology and application. I have Raja Sharif over here from Pharma Trust, Alex Manson from Standard Chartered Ventures, Professor Bill Roscoe, Director of the Oxford Blockchain Research Center, as well as founder of the Blockhouse Technology Limited, and Zheng Wei Kwa, who is the founder of a company called Accredify. Yeah. I'm going to begin by asking the 4 panelists to introduce themselves. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through the use indications that are obvious, that are positive, and then we're going to move into an area that's probably a bit more murky, possibly controversial, and then we're going to talk about trust, which is what Professor Roscoe's expertise is in. Yeah. So if I can just ask, Zheng Wei, you want to start?
Sure.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Zheng Wei here, the CEO and co-founder of Accredify. It's a company I started 4 years ago, basically to build digital trust in the entire world. And we do this by using the Web3 tech stack to help enterprises to securely issue verifiable credentials. So nice to meet you guys.
Hi, I'm Bill Roscoe. I'm a scientist, not a financial whiz kid. I have been quite a well-known computer scientist around the UK for many years. I was head of Oxford University Computer Science Department for 11 years. But in my semi-retirement, I have taken to blockchain and to trusted distributed computing in general. And we think we're really going somewhere, but equally, I think the blockchain takes a lot more understanding than people generally have.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Manson, SC Ventures, relatively nascent, 4 years old, so I'd like to think we're a relatively young unit, where we build ventures, but also engage with fintech startups and experiment with business models. Our objective is to rewire the DNA in banking, and in so doing reconciling banking, financial services, and societies. I was going to say I feel really bad for the cramped room, and thank you for your interest. You have an incredible physical stamina, I can say.
Good morning, Raja Sharif, CEO of Pharma Trust. We specialize in the healthcare sector, so we look at the pharmaceutical supply chain, but we also look at new treatments such as cell and gene therapies, how to administer them, and ensure legal compliance by using blockchain solutions.
Thanks, Raja. Since you have the mic, you want to just tell us a little bit more? What exactly are you doing on the supply chain for drugs?
So on the
that uses a blockchain.
So we actually started back in 2016. The idea being that one could monitor the supply chain and coordinate the various stakeholders between the pharmaceutical sector to ensure a number of things. One was to, of course, eliminate counterfeit drugs, which was our original ambition. But of course, we noticed when we were creating that more than the philanthropic kind of effort that we had, as you know, counterfeit drugs kills about 1 million people a year. It's a $200 billion industry. We noticed that there were other efficiencies the pharmaceutical sector could benefit with real-time information. So essentially, when we have that kind of trust and real-time access between the various stakeholders, that in itself would eke out better supply chain movements of drugs from the point of production to the point of consumption. Mm-hmm. And I think that's recently been seen during the COVID situation, where there's been kind of gluts within the supply chain, even the pharmaceutical supply chain. And that was made worse here in the UK because of Brexit as well. Mm-hmm. So there are all sorts of issues, particularly around hormonal treatments that weren't available in the UK.
But how does a blockchain-based system alleviate these problems?
So the pharmaceuticals.
I suppose it's more than just the realization that there is a backlog or a glut. Ultimately, for it to be actionable, many other things need to happen, right?
Yeah.
For the proper distribution of drugs.
So you've got 2 or 3 issues that one has to deal with when it comes to the pharmaceutical supply chain. One is, are the people you're dealing with trustworthy, right? And this is usually an issue in terms of how counterfeit drugs actually infiltrate the supply chain currently. Usually at the warehousing stage or the middle part of it, that's when the drugs actually infiltrate the supply chain. The second part of it is, are the drugs real itself? So in the USA now, there's something called the DSCA regulations, which mean that each packet has to be labeled uniquely. So it's that whole concept of a digital twin. Mm-hmm. Now, in the US, you have to actually track each change in the chain of custody. So you'll always know who had that drug. In the EU, we call it the FMD regulations. The problem with the FMD regulations is that you're only required to log it at the beginning of the process and when you dispense. So there's a big black hole in the middle. And that, of course, causes problems in terms of drugs infiltrating it, even though they are uniquely labeled. So it's a race to the end. Now, what blockchain can do in that kind of situation is, of course, because everyone's getting the information in real time, when you see two passports or two identical labels, you can catch it right in the middle, right? The second thing is, I think this comes more to KYC and knowing who you're dealing with, is you can give each legitimate member of the supply chain an identity, so you know as it moves from the chain of custody, it's going to a legitimate player, so you have that information always.
Thanks, Raja. Zhengwei, can I just move on to you? Want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing and very importantly, a pivot you took during the pandemic that really made quite a difference to the ability to travel?
Maybe then I share a little bit about why Accredify exists in the first place. So we look at how data has changed in the last decades and century, where we as humans, we started with print data. So the way that we transfer information is either through paper or rock or something like this. And then very quickly in the last decades, we went into digital data. So that's when the likes of Google, Baidu, Yahoo, etc., they actually point you to where these data sits. And we all believe that the future is verifiable data. So that shift, on the day where we can exchange information in a instantly reliable manner, under a nanosecond, that's when a lot of processes will change, including supply chain, KYC, so on and so forth. When the chain of custody stop having this constant loop where you always have to go back to the data source, and then you start to be able to rely on information in a more decentralized mechanism. So what we really believe is that today, we all have email addresses, and we interact with all the different services with our email address. And in most cases, you are just another identity, right? And each time you're something new, because they all sit in silo database. But the future is where your identity in a Web3 concept allow you access to these different services with you as an individual-centric model. So then that comes back to a very important point that Jui mentioned. So when the pandemic came, we were primarily working in the education industry, helping most of the Singapore schools to actually issue verifiable certificates, transcripts to help mobility of the workforce. And then back then, the Ministry of Health looked at the situation of the pandemic, and they realized that it's suddenly, in a very quick fashion, there's going to be a situation where many parties are required to rely on information that can come up from many parties, and they may not know each other. So then that's the perfect use case for a technology like blockchain. So the first use case that we did was actually to help in the issuance of recovery memos. So how can we ensure that someone who has recovered from a healthcare facility then can easily and quickly go back to an accommodation or a workplace, because the impact and the consequence of having a single error for someone that actually hasn't recovered into the premise is way too big, and we have to actually cure it at the bud. So that was the use case, and very quickly we extended to other medical records, including fit-to-fly memos, COVID-19 vaccination cert, and then now we're extending into the insurance space as well.
Thank you. Alex? Alex, okay, the other big movement is decentralized finance. I struggle to get my head around it. I want to understand how it's relevant to me, and equally how it's relevant to the banks. I mean, how do the banks see it? I mean, do they feel it's a threat, or do they feel that if you can't beat them, you better join them?
Right. So I'll try and define decentralized finance in a second, and perhaps try and bring blockchain to life. Let's take a step back based on the show of hands and sort of give you a few life examples of what blockchain is actually used for in the context of finance today. If you take the D in decentralized, it means a purist would say no central banks, no central authority, no trusted intermediaries, no banks. You kind of want to take me out, right? Yes. Like you don't like me. Yeah. So obviously it's relevant. Paying attention. People love to hate their bankers, and this is right in the middle of the fairway. So decentralized finance is basically any form of finance, owning money, transferring assets, money, in the context of no centralized authority, be it a central bank or banks, right? That's what it is. Now, when we talk about blockchain, and perhaps there's an element of demystifying it a little bit, when we talk about blockchain, it doesn't have to be about DeFi quite yet. DLT, distributed ledger technology, is a ledger. A ledger is not a business per se. A ledger is a tool to run a business. My first involvement as a banker with blockchain, I want to say 2014, so it's a few years ago now. We weren't talking about DeFi, the metaverse did not exist. I was focused on avoiding what we call double financing. So double financing in trades, I'm financing an asset, somebody else is financing the same asset. We don't know that we are both financing the same asset. It's called fraud. It happens.
Think of the film The Producers.
Yeah, nice. It's a good. So the first use case I was thinking about is, how about we can avoid double financing by, with the use of blockchain. It's obviously one of the use cases, right? And it works. Then we moved on to payments. Is payment the killer app for blockchain? And I initially thought it was. It's not clear to me in the context of conventional finance that it is the case today for a variety of reasons. I think Web3 might take us there. Where in the context of Web3, it is blockchain that will move assets and money around, etc. Other use cases could include settlement of trades. It could include lending against securities. It could a number of other areas of finance and banking. We haven't talked about DeFi yet. We're talking just about use cases in the context of banking using a DLT as a tool. And I think the email analogy, by the way, is an interesting one, which is we all have emails. We don't worry too much about what happens when we hit send, right? It just goes and it's an email. I would predict that the underlying technology of blockchain is going to evolve and very much be the same way, which is it's going to be simplified and made accessible to all in a way that we don't really need to worry about the ledger we're using. It's just a ledger. But it enables a bunch of things like traceability, auditability, irrevocability. All those things are important in finance. And very importantly, it enables us to transfer not only money, but all the data, what I call the metadata associated with that transfer of money. So I don't need a system to transfer money, another system to transfer messages. It can all happen on the chain. So this is the kind of progress that is doable with blockchain, but just bring to light quite simple transactions that we could deal with before we get to DAOs and DeFis and all that.
Professor Roscoe?
Hi.
The power of the blockchain, it's irrevocable, it's open, it's distributed, holds so much promise, but you clearly think that it's not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, that there are, it's not perfect, and you've done a lot of research on this. Would you like to share your thoughts on this?
I mean, blockchain means very different things to a lot of different people. I mean, the basic concept of a blockchain is extremely simple. It's just what we as computer scientists would call a data structure, where you've got literally a chain of blocks which are glued to one another by things called cryptographic hashes. It's very simple, and it's something which has got lots of potential use cases that people have latched onto. I think that often people have latched onto these great applications and use cases and wonderful ideas like cryptocurrencies before the world has really had a chance to sort of ponder and think about what blockchains look like or should look like. So we've got very diverse applications in blockchain. We've got the strange concept of a private blockchain, which many people mean by a blockchain which is run by a single provider on behalf of a community, and which is largely, I think, unnecessary, because I think a blockchain is only really necessary where you need a proper distributed trust environment where people can check each other. I mean, I think it's okay to have a blockchain that's run by a single organization, provided everybody is checking it all the time. Then you've got coalition blockchains run by a small pre-arranged cabal of banks or something like this, and then we rush all the way out to a public blockchain which is accessible to all. And these are all very, very different things, although they share the same basic common data structure. And I think that the world has rushed into many of these things. I mean, perhaps a little bit too soon. I certainly think that there's a huge amount of evidence that the cryptocurrency movement, shall we call it, is based on mainly, let's call it, financial optimism. Namely the desire to make money easily and to transfer money easily. But at the same time, it's a lot of what the public blockchain movement has been doing has been contrary to the mainstream values of society, as we all know. It's allowed people to transfer money too easily and without checks. And at the same time, as we know, Bitcoin and other blockchains were introduced in such a way that they wasted gargantuan amounts of energy. And so what I'm doing, and by the way, I should have said at the start of this that I too love Singapore. I go to Singapore regularly, and I was very happy to be able to get back to Singapore for the first time in 2 years, just about 3 weeks ago. And because we are trying to set up sort of businesses in the areas of custody and trusted computing and perhaps DAOs again out there. So, if you like, what I have been doing in this is sort of stepping back and looking at blockchain from a point of view which is perhaps unusual, in the sense that when I first saw blockchain, I thought, wow, what a great piece of science! What a great way to build trust. I didn't think what a great way to build money, or to create money, or to make money. So what I've been doing is I've been sort of trying to reinvent blockchain as a flexible technology, and to rebuild consensus and all the general sort of building blocks of blockchain, while at the same time trying to I've been sort of factoring the blockchain environment, if you like, into multiple layers. At the bottom layer, you have the actual implementation of a blockchain, which, in terms of a public blockchain, consists of many different could consist of many different programs, all running the same basic design. Above that, you've got the technical design, which will typically contain the consensus algorithm and so on. Above that, again, you often have an economic model, how people make money, how people trade money, how people are constrained to do the right thing by money. And all around that, you've got a sort of social level to say, what does this blockchain do for society? How is my behavior on this blockchain constrained by my desire not to be seen to be doing wrong, for example? There again, it comes back to issues like KYC.
You're also the founder of the Blockhouse Technology Limited.
That's right.
Which attempts to make decentralized systems trustworthy.
Yeah.
Can you sort of give us a quick overview on how you,
well, I think
of your approach? Yeah.
I think we all understand, I think, what we mean by trusting a system. We trust it to do the right thing. We trust it to keep our secrets secret. We trust, we trust it to perform the tasks that we actually want it to do, and not to do anything we don't want it to do. I mean, fundamentally, what the blockchain is a guardian of integrity, in the sense that if you put something into a blockchain and the blockchain works, you can't take it out of the blockchain again. So it provides an indelible record of what's been put in the past. And so this is often been held up as an exemplar for many areas of societies, for example, accountancy and audit, for supply chain issues, whether it's drugs, whether it's the carbon economy, which I think is a great application for blockchain.
But it can be breached, though.
Sorry?
It can be breached, though. This chain is...
I think we have to build chains so that they can't be breached. And I think, again, this is something which I study in enormous depth, right? I mean, what blockchain? What I always like to do this is to explain that security and trust come in two different flavors. One is the concept of integrity and doing the right thing. And blockchain is absolutely brilliant for that, because a community of people can come together and agree on how things are arbitrated, agree on the order of things, agree on what's been said. What blockchain in itself is hopeless at is achieving privacy. Because if you put something on the blockchain, everybody can see it, right? So you need some extra technology on top of a blockchain to guarantee, say, that your health data or financial data remains secret. And I think everybody in the technical world would agree that you need two different technologies for handling the issues of, as I say, integrity and this sort of thing, where blockchain is the right answer, and the issue of privacy and privacy of data, where there are a number of competing technologies. The current leaders in this area are the area of trusted computing, which is to say you build computers or you use standard computers in special ways, in such a way that even if they're being operated by your enemy, you can still trust them. There's also multi-party computing, where you spread computing over a number of different arenas in such a way that none of the people doing the computing actually gets to know the result. And finally, there's a rather more esoteric area called homomorphic encryption, which has been the great hope of many people, but I think it's further off from use than the other two. And so TBTL, my company, specializes in blockchain, as you say, and also in the use primarily of trusted computing and of where necessary, of multi-party computing to achieve integrity on the one hand using the blockchain, and to achieve privacy on the other. So, for example, if you want to do custody of health data, then you keep it private using your confidential computing applications, and you make sure everything is sort of kept in order and done by the right people, etc., via blockchain.
Thanks, Prof. Alex, you wanted to chip in, and
sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was just going to build on a comment you made about trust and the integrity of the system, and you expressed reservations about cryptocurrencies just now, and the point is we don't have to agree on that. Cryptocurrencies may be the one use case at scale that makes commercial sense on blockchain today. But for a long time, there weren't a whole lot of use cases on the internet. It was gaming, and another one I can think of. And look how far the internet has come. So the point is, we don't need to agree that cryptocurrencies are going up or down. We just need to agree that digital assets are here to stay, which I think we can all agree with. If digital assets are here to stay, then institutional adoption is inevitable. At some point, institutions, be it banks, others, will adopt digital assets. Meaning somebody has got to build a robust infrastructure at what I'd call institutional grade for such assets. We started doing this. I wanted to trade cryptocurrencies for the bank, why not? And then sort of, if you're going to trade cryptocurrencies, you have to own them at some point. If you're going to have to own them, I have to put them somewhere. So I looked around and said, oh gosh, where? It's a whole bunch of startups, no operating track record, no capital, no concept of what it means to be a custodian, really.
Yeah.
And importantly, amalgamating the functions of custody and exchange and settlement and all these things, which is a big no-no for the institutional market. So we parked the idea of trading and decided to start building the infrastructure, which is today called Zodiac Custody and is operating here in London. And
Is that
so
also the genesis of SC Ventures?
No. SC Ventures was all about rewiring the DNA in banking, and this is one of the various themes, including world trade and supply chains, including the online economy, including sustainability, financial inclusion, which we believe we'll need to address. in order to make sure banks do what's expected from them and what societies expect to do from them. But digital assets is a very important part of that, right? And so the point of a trusted, robust infrastructure is quite critical. And yes, identity is part of it. Integrity of the system is part of it. Technological resilience is part of it. KYC is part of it. Financial crime compliance is also part of it. Implementing travel rules, all these things. By the way, I've just gone through the whole array of questions that our regulators could ask anytime in the conventional context, and not surprisingly, they'll be asking the same questions in the context of DeFi and blockchain. But building that infrastructure is what it'll take for adoption to ultimately take place more broadly and at scale.
But we're not there yet, are we?
Of course not.
Yeah. So what's missing? I mean, with Zodiac, what else do you need to do to make it institutional grade?
I think, Zodiac custody is at institutional grade and operating today, following brokerage and exchange, following settlement, following a whole ecosystem of bits and pieces of the infrastructure, which ultimately will be necessary in order for the system to operate at scale in a robust way. So this is happening, probably sooner than we think, but this is absolutely what it takes.
Prof?
So we were talking yesterday about how to get our custody technology, where we have truly decentralized custody services, where people keep ownership of their own assets inside things called TEEs, Trusted Execution Enclaves. And we realized that we have a very mature now technology for doing this. What we absolutely lack is the expertise and the, if you like, the regulatory contacts, the insurance, and all the other bits and pieces that one needs for actually operating a custody service. And so, I rapidly came to the conclusion, as did my colleagues, that what we really need to do is to put together the people who are developing the technology with the people who know about these services in a wider context. And
Roger, just to switch gears a little bit, your supply chains usually consist of stakeholders across multiple jurisdictions. How do you ensure compliance to its, to your operations vis-a-vis the blockchain, the platform that you use? How do you get everyone across different countries?
So it is a challenge. I just wanted to pick up one point, which is probably related to this, which is in terms of this fear of blockchains and lack of control and exchange. The biggest money launderers, and I hate to say this, are the banks, right? The HSBC got fined, was it 900 million in the US for, there was a small branch in Austria that was laundering a lot of Russian mafia money, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one has to measure the risk in terms of what an individual is going to launder money and what's being done at an institutional level. And we have these problems throughout. The thing is, there's always a fear of innovation, right? And I think I started off as a junior lawyer back in 1995 working for an IT company. Now, most of my friends went into banking and real estate, and they were laughing at me. They're saying, oh, this internet, this isn't going to take over. What are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. They said banking will never be allowed on a laptop. The regulators will never allow it, and all this kind of stuff. Now I do all my banking on a challenger bank, like Tide or Revolut on my mobile phone. So I think, sometimes the older guard, and I consider myself part of the older guard because I'm old, but when you look at all the millennials and Gen Z, they don't have these fears. And I think they have kind of innate human trust of each other. Yes, things do go wrong off and on, and this happens. Coming back to our point, in terms of how do we trust the participants in a supply chain, I think we obviously don't have similar obligations to the banks, but the pharmaceutical sector is the second most regulated sector after finance, right? Because you're even more than finance, I would say you're affecting somebody's life. If I take a medicine which hasn't got active ingredients in it, my cancer isn't going to get better, or my AIDS symptoms aren't going to get better. Worse, if somebody's made it out of chemicals that will poison me, it will just kill me. And this does actually, unfortunately, happen. So how do we manage to get trusted parties into it is the usual way. You have to ensure you've done the kind of checks on them to make sure they're part of that. And that is actually done by governmental authorities. Remember, there are regulators for the pharmaceutical sector, so you do have to be registered with the EMEA or the FDA or... Exactly, so you know most of the entities. There are kind of checking services now, a little bit like Dun & Bradstreet or some of the other experience checks that can tell you, look, yes, this is a legitimate company, yes, this person works in it. But again, the fact is, if I've managed to capture the beginning of the process with a unique identity, and I've captured the end of the process, most of the people in the middle are kind of, it's less important. Because, of course, what I'm trying to check is that if I scan this packet, it needs to tell me it's genuine, and it needs to tell me it's going to be effective. It can also tell me who's actually touched it, obviously, because we're doing every part of the exchange in the chain of custody. But what's important is this genuine, right, or is it not genuine? And the way they do that for the pharmaceutical sector is not only do they uniquely label it, it's a way they have tamper-proof packaging around the medicine itself to make sure that, you know, somebody hasn't pulled out the genuine item and replaced it with a shoddy item. So as long as the packet is properly sealed and you can scan the unique identifier, you should be comfortable that it's safe, no matter who's really touched it, kind of according to the process. And that's not important just to ensure that I've got a genuine article. That's, of course, you know, the most important thing. But it does help with just-in-time supplies. It helps me with demand planning. Now, some pharmaceuticals don't like some of these processes because of something called parallel imports. So I can sell AIDS medicines to South Africa at a very knocked-down price. Some middleman will re-import it back into the UK and sell it at a very high price. So, you know, sometimes it's not just, and you know, I say there with deepest respect, but sometimes it's the institutions that we're dealing with, the multinationals, which we trust to look after us, don't sometimes like things happening, and giving power, or the perception of power, going away from themselves to society or the common man. So a little bit of a broader answer than what you asked, but I think for the pharmaceutical sector, as long as I can ensure the packet is genuine, the drugs inside it are genuine, in terms of the transfers, it's not as critical as money laundering or terrorist financing and all that kind of good stuff.
Zheng-Wei, I expect that the true is same for your business, in your whether it's with verification of educational documents or the work that you do with the registry of companies.
Perhaps I can share a little bit about my experience helping the enterprises get on board. Because when we first went into the space in 2019, one of the first clients that we had was it was a top Asia Pacific university, and they have already started looking at blockchain certificates. Right, they want to do something themselves. And this is the process, right? They're expecting 40, 50 years old, not so tech savvy. We call them auntie in Singapore. And the process goes like this. She has to first purchase a Ledger Nano. I'm not sure how many of you, the blockchain curious one. Ledger Nano is basically a USB hardware wallet that stores your private key to access the stuff. She has to go there. She downloads Chrome. She downloads MetaMask. She plugs that in. She has to remember the seed phrase. She has to jot down the seed phrase. She has to go somewhere in a random exchange to buy Ether and then transfer it to the wallet and then optimize the gas fee using the gas tracker on Etherscan, put it inside, generate the Merkle root, put it in, and then submit the transaction onto the blockchain. And the entire school shares one Ledger Nano, which basically is the key to open and issue every document that they have. So, you know, that entire process, I'm not sure how many of you even still remember it by now, but that is the last step of what they need to do. which is putting the transaction onto the blockchain. So can you imagine that entire process? It's equivalent to, you watch the video of someone sending an email in 1980s where you have to connect the modem and and then getting an email out. Exactly the same. So when we went in, we basically had to relook at the entire process and introduce, like what Bill said, different layers of technology and not just the blockchain itself, so that we can simplify and basically the entire process now happens in one single click. Right? It's a mixture of multi-signature wallet, the way that we manage the private and public key, the way that we do our gas optimization so that they don't have to worry about that, and we abstract the entire layer from them. So pretty much like sending an email, interacting with the blockchain should be just a single click in the future. Yeah.
Alex, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, thanks. I was going to build on your point, Raja, around supply chains and perhaps more generally the world of supply chains. You trust MNCs to know their supply chains. Well, it's pretty hard, right? The suppliers of suppliers of third, fourth degree suppliers, and the same thing on the distributor side. And the amount of information in that supply chain is huge. It's very hard for an MNC today to actually know all these things. And so, how about your ESG risk? How about KY ESG? How about analyzing your ESG risks in that supply chain across the board? How about your consumers ask you to maintain a certain, gender diversity in that supply chain? How about, et cetera, right? So generally speaking, the world has rediscovered supply chains and how complex they can be, and the trade-offs between efficiency and resilience here, which is the basics. More recently during the pandemic, but generally speaking, making supply chains resilient has a lot to do with mastering that information and making it transparent and enabling trust this way. And from here we can talk about decentralized trust, which again is a use case for the technology we're discussing here.
Yeah. And just on supply chains, in terms of the information, there are cloud systems for administering unique labels here in Europe called the FMD or NMVS servers, and in the US, the DSCSA. So these kind of passports or unique identities are actually just kept for everyone to be able to access, regardless of whether they're using a blockchain. What we're doing is, of course, just maintaining that particular unique identity on ours. But you're right. I mean, supply chains are very complex, but very important as well. I mean, we're talking about medicine, and we're not in food. But when people don't get wheat, they're not going to get bread, they're not going to get pasta, they're going to get riots on the streets. So, yeah, as we're seeing right now, I mean, I think in those situations, the technical infrastructure that is used, and we say blockchains are probably the best way of regarding that. Now that, of course, we have cross-chain interoperability with some of these blockchain platforms, which will allow efficiencies in particularly dangerous situations that we're currently in.
Thank you. Okay, at this stage, I'm gonna turn to the floor and see if any of you have any questions for our panelists. Madame.
I was wondering if you were working with Affinity.
The question from the floor is if we were working with Affinity. For context, Affinity is a company that is funded by the Singapore government under an arm called Temasek. And Affinity provides like an infrastructure layer for people to easily share credentials. So we are actually partners in Singapore, particularly for the travel use case, where because there are so many stakeholders in the ecosystem, and it's very difficult for you to provide the right solution for every one of them. And there was a very short time span for us to introduce something to enable COVID travel, to enable travel in the COVID situation. So with Affinity, what we did was to segregate the duties that we have, and basically we work with the data sources. So we work with the healthcare providers, we connect to the lab information systems, we draw pathology, serology results from them, convert it into a verifiable Web3 credential, pass it on to the traveler. And then what Affinity does in this case is to work with the travel stakeholders. So they work with the airports and the airlines, and they can read the credentials that we issue. and that's how we partner up. And I think in just a broader sense, the entire industry is still so nascent. There's so much to do, and I think the more player coming together is even better. So we're always open about sharing how we did it, especially how we work with the different government agencies in Singapore to digitize the education sector, the healthcare sectors, the corporate sectors for our business documents. If other companies in other countries can do the same that we do, I think we can have a better kind of synergy between the different countries. So happy to share how we did it, what we did anytime.
I'm really interested in your comments about how blockchain can be applied to the education sector. So I wonder if you can expand a bit further, because I know some companies start to use blockchain to support lifelong learning agenda of like individual students. So they can have like their own blockchain certificate they can use for jobs, for upgrading their skills, but the issue is how to create like a global standard of blockchain for education, where they can take them everywhere they go, rather than just by one country or two. Yeah, thank you.
I think we are all still building the narrative of Web3 and blockchain together as we speak. So in the education space, honestly speaking, when we first went into education, we thought that it is going to be a fraud solution. We thought that we are here to solve the impact of fake certificates, of fraudulent certificates, so on and so forth, but it really wasn't. The key that we thought was the most impactful was actually mobility of people within the domestic workforce as well as cross-border. Perhaps I can put you in a vision that I have for the future where, let's say, the education industry is pretty well embedded in the Web3 space, is one where I no longer need a degree. So I don't need a degree from University of London, so on and so forth. But what I would have, though, is I've taken the best AI course from Stanford. I have taken the best machine repair course from Germany. I've taken the best maybe silicon preparation stuff from another part of the world, and these collectively, because they are all independently verifiable, that builds up my profile, and therefore I can work at a company that does maybe bulletproof AI Windows. I don't know, but that's kind of the future that I see, and that's only possible if everybody works on a more independently verifiable manner. And I don't think that we need necessarily a common standard, a one standard that rules it all, but it's more like what Alex have shared, that even if they are on different standards, you wouldn't know, right? You wouldn't know because they're just somehow interoperable. Yeah.
Professor Roscoe?
I mean, this conversation reminds me of what some of my colleagues are doing in healthcare, because if you look around different jurisdictions, but even within these jurisdictions, different hospitals, different doctors, different companies, you find they all store their healthcare data in different formats. You get the same codes meaning different things to different people. One of my colleagues, Professor Jim Davis from Oxford, and his group were behind much of the sort of data standards work in the COVID pandemic. And the major issue they had to deal with there is something called metadata. It's not the data itself; it's the data. It's the variable data standards that you pass from application to application, which is very much the same thing we've just been hearing about here in education. And Jim regards blockchain as the ideal way to store if not data, although you could do that as well, but certainly the metadata relating to different data standards. And so if you look closely into sort of varying standards, I think blockchain very much comes into its own.
I was just thinking, based on your question, we should talk a little bit about the metaverse. Lots of conversations around it. We're co-creating the metaverse in many ways. So more questions than answers, and it's a fascinating journey. But first use case is obviously gaming. By the way, demystified. Anyone with kids playing Minecraft, your kid's been in the metaverse, a primitive form of the metaverse, but it's been in it for a long time. If you're a cyclist, you're on Swift, you have an avatar cycling. That's my case. I love my avatar. I've been in a primitive 2D form of Web 2 form of the metaverse for some time already. So gaming is the first use case, but obviously education is one. Immersive education for all, anywhere you are, can be made consistent. It's a use case. Oh, healthcare is an obvious use case, right?
You had some strong views outside when we were talking about
primitive. I was just going to add that back to finance. If the kernel sin of the internet was to not enable the transfer of money, I didn't say this, it's not my quote, it's a very well-known guy who contributed to the internet a lot, but if that was the kernel sin, we can, I think, bet that Web3 will not make that mistake. There will be transfer of money and assets, and this is coins, and this is enabled by blockchain. So blockchain will be enables the decentralized tracking of ownership of anything, which is ultimately going to power the metaverse. But all these use cases, education not included and not limited to it, are things we'll be exploring in the next month, years in that new universe.
Alex, you were also talking out, when we were standing outside, about how in healthcare you have finance in one silo, the insurers in another silo, the providers in a third silo, and you mentioned that at SC Ventures you've tried to address that. You've got 1 or 2 startups that you've built.
Natasha is here in the room, and she's actually one of the founding members of a venture which is very dear to my heart. But you introduce yourself by saying, I know nothing about finance, I'm a healthcare guy, and which, by the way, you sell yourself cheap. You know a few things. You know a thing or two. But my point was, and so why? Why is that? How can it possibly be that finance and healthcare don't speak? If I want to do retirement planning, which is what this venture is all about, I need a financial readiness score and I need a health score in the same time. And that's associated with my lifestyle. Now, if you work in a bank, you're a banker. If you work in an insurance company, then you'll sell insurance policies. If you work for a hospital or a pharma company, you do what you do in a hospital, in a pharma company. And these sectors of the economy are conventionally organized as corporates, meaning they work in silos. And no one's actually taking a horizontal view of an individual, like all of us here, with the buzzword is holistic needs, right? Across health, finance, planning, lifestyle, etc. So that's a business model which we've been exploring, and that venture is beginning to scale now and doing nicely. But there is absolutely no reason why healthcare and finance shouldn't speak. In fact, they're intimately related.
Actually, just to add to this point, in a particular part of the healthcare sector, we have cell and gene therapy is what we're talking about. The central issue there is actually chain of identity. Who does this sample belong to, and whose treatment is this? Otherwise they can die, right? You give another person's treatment to this particular person, they'll die. So what happens is, it comes back to what we all touch upon, which is this is my identity, and then everything should revolve around that identity, right? So I'll get this treatment, this is my sample, this is my reimbursement for this treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So it does come back to the whole thing, that chain of identity is sometimes more important than chain of custody for us in the healthcare sector. Although, of course, for regulators, they always want to know what the chain of custody was for that particular treatment.
Yeah, and so implying don't just sell me the product that you have, whether it's a policy or a bank product. I own my identity. I own the data associated with it. I can compose. And the word composability is an important element of, again, DeFi and blockchain. But I can compose solutions based on this, and get to an increasingly bespoke set of solutions based on who I am, which and that's an information that I have, I own, I control, and can work on it. Yeah.
Actually, further on one of the projects we're watching, or doing, or implementing, we will be able to track your sample, but not only can we track the sample, we'll be able to track the data that's produced from that sample. So for GDPR purposes, you can actually restrict access to that data. I mean, there's ethical issues with this, but the technology is available. And not only that, one of the really interesting things is you create this marketplace for your sample where you could be actually taking a share of the profits of the pharma companies if they bring treatments on it. Now, this is very kind of early stages. There are ethical problems for this because in the UK, generally donors are not rewarded for their samples. In some other countries, you know, you're given something for your blood, or et cetera, et cetera. But conceptually, the possibility is there, and our product will be ready by the end of the year for this, which is funded by Invade. Right, so.
Do you have a question? Yes, please.
I was very curious. You said, exactly the point. You know, GDPR is such a big issue, and you said, you know, you do something to kind of, you know, keep the data away. So I'm very curious, how do you do it? Because, and which blockchain is this on?
Yeah. So on GDPR, essentially, it's not so bad for the pharmaceutical track and trace because GDPR only touches on live people. So the healthcare side, the pharmaceutical side is more of an issue for privacy of data or confidentiality for pharmaceutical companies. Now, in GDPR, of course, we have all sorts of rights, which is modifying the information, sometimes not allowing people access to that information. So what we do is, and legally, right, so you have to go to a law firm. Legally, you do have the ability to access that data, but if we encrypt it and break the encryption key that has the data on the blockchain, then you can't access it, right? So that's how we get over it. But we think, you know, GDPR kind of in the EU, if you go to like Germany, it's very, very strict. It's really difficult to do things in Germany. And that's why most clinical trials are done outside Germany because of these data restrictions. But we think ICOs, which are the information commissioners, they'll take a more flexible approach to it, a little bit like, you know, your data on the internet. Once you've asked for the right to be forgotten, it's still there. It's just you can't access it. We think ICOs will probably take a similar approach to blockchains, which is the data's still there, but you just can't access it. Do you see what I mean? Now, whether that plays out legally or not when it comes to individuals, that's a different issue. But like, I think for just asset tracking, GDPR isn't too much of an issue.
So also differentiate between private permission blockchains versus public permissionless blockchains. You know, we just said it's a great thing about blockchain. It's traceable, irrevocable, immutable, transparent, public tool. That's kind of hard to combine with right to be forgotten, right? So the regulation of this is going to be complex. I think, you know, I'll turn over to you in a second. You know, I think, you know, my prediction would be that in as much as we like permissionlessness, because it enables, you know, you wrote a bunch of lines of codes on the Ethereum platform. I don't need your permission to add on to it. I can compose my own solutions and so forth. We like that. That fosters innovation. This is great in so many respects. But in the same time, you're going to want to own your data. You're going to want some trust. You're going to want some resilience. Yeah. And so the prediction is a bit of a hybrid between the purest view of DeFi, which is completely decentralized, and some safeguards around security and data specifically.
Can I just say that it is certainly possible to have data sort of on the blockchain but be deletable. You can't delete what's on the blockchain, but if what you do is you store data in an encrypted form, and you store it off the blockchain in a place where it can be deleted, you can still store a cryptographic hash of it on the blockchain, so that all the integrity properties of the blockchain remain. Anybody can check that this is the data, but it just now becomes deletable. Another thing I want to raise in this particular context is that I talked earlier about confidential computing in trusted enclaves, and this is much touted, and I personally tend to believe it as a solution to maintaining confidentiality of things like health data while allowing people to do research on it.
Are there any other questions? Yes, please.
Alex mentioned financial inclusion as being one of the key drivers for investment by Decentralised. How do you see blockchain, and maybe that's a question not for Alex, for other members of the board, but just financial inclusion being impacted by blockchain?
I'm Zhengwei. Finishing.
Financial inclusion. How can financial inclusion?
How can financial inclusion
be facilitated by blockchain technologies?
And that question is targeted at me? Really?
If I keep talking about it, I won't stop, which is a problem.
I wish I have something good to say, but I don't. So
Maybe Alex,
anybody
you
want
wanna
to pick it up?
crack at it?
Yeah.
It looks like it's up your alley.
I mean,
Professor, yeah.
financial inclusion, I don't have that much to say about. One thing that really worries me about the blockchain world and the digital world in general is what's called the digital divide. I have a 93-year-old mother, and I'm constantly giving her advice on how to use the internet. And not many 93-year-old women have got a professor of computer science as a son. And so it's I really, really worry about all you young people. I don't count myself as young anymore because I'm 65, right? But all you young people rushing away with this brave new world and creating a brave new world of digital technology where all us old folk just get excluded. And I think this is something that has to be very seriously taken on board.
I need to bring this to a close, but may I suggest, please come and approach the panelists at the end of this session. It leaves me now to just thank the 4 panelists, if you put your hands together with me, and thank you guys.